The trade conflict between Canada and the United States has its roots in years of accumulated tensions, marked by unilateral decisions that have disrupted the balance of one of the continent's strongest economic alliances. For decades, both countries have maintained a relationship based on reciprocal trade that has allowed for the large-scale exchange of goods and services. However, in recent times, protectionist policies implemented in Washington have lit the fuse for a confrontation whose impact is felt in fundamental sectors of the Canadian economy. As part of a strategy to protect its domestic markets, the United States government adopted controversial tariff measures aimed at safeguarding national productive sectors at any cost. These decisions, however, brought unexpected consequences for its trading partners, especially Canada, whose industrial sector, encompassing everything from steel and aluminum to technology and sports equipment, was severely affected. The economic pressure and uncertainty generated in Ottawa's financial corridors led to the need for a decisive, clear, and unequivocal response. It was then that the Canadian Finance Minister took the floor, unequivocally declaring, "We will not allow unjust policies to erode our country's economy. We will respond dollar for dollar." With that determination, the Canadian government announced the imposition of a 25% tariff on nearly $30 billion worth of imports from the United States. This adjustment is not merely a change in numbers, it is a strategic measure intended to restore the balance in a relationship that, until that moment, was built on trust and mutual benefit. News of the measure spread rapidly, making it clear that what was at stake went well beyond a simple price dispute. The market reaction was immediate. Business leaders, analysts, and officials from both countries began rethinking the future of a trade system that had underpinned regional stability. The repercussions were felt across various economic sectors, sparking fears that production costs would rise, supply chains would be disrupted, and a domino effect could be triggered that would impact millions of workers on both sides of the border. The announcement of the Canadian tariff stands as the spark that ignited a delicate and complex arena, where every political decision affects the daily lives of entire communities. While some viewed Ottawa's response as an act of legitimate economic self-defense, others warned that this step could be the prelude to an escalation of measures which, if not resolved through dialogue, could lead to unpredictable consequences on the global economic stage. The situation demands thorough analysis, as this episode not only questions the validity of the trade policies adopted by both countries, but also highlights the fragility of a system in which economic interdependence can transform into a double-edged sword. This confrontation is set within a global context where international trade relations are no longer mere transactions, but have become the foundation of political and social stability. In essence, the announcement of these tariffs marks the beginning of a new era in North American trade policy. The conflict, which surged forcefully after years of latent tensions, demonstrates that the protection of economic sovereignty is non-negotiable, and that every unilateral action can trigger chain reactions with ramifications at levels never before seen. With every statement and each figure announced, the urgency to reevaluate strategies and seek dialogue mechanisms that can prevent a prolonged and detrimental confrontation for both nations is underscored. Canada's reaction quickly made itself known with near-surgical precision. As soon as the retaliatory measure was announced, vital sectors such as steel, aluminum, computer equipment, sports goods, and cast iron were directly affected. The Canadian government adopted a dollar-for-dollar strategy, ensuring that no unilateral action at the border went unanswered. Consequently, this resulted in the imposition of a 25% tariff on nearly $30 billion in imports coming from the United States. Within hours, the impact of this decision was reflected in financial corridors and on the production lines of key industries. The immediate increase in the cost of essential inputs raised alarms among business leaders and analysts. The basic tools and materials for manufacturing were experiencing a price jump that threatened to reverberate throughout the entire cross-border supply chain. Companies that depend on steel and aluminum, fundamental for construction and the automotive industry, were forced to recalculate their budgets and operational strategies, as every extra dollar had to be recouped in some way. Based on clear data and preliminary studies, experts projected that this measure would lead to a generalized increase in the cost of imported goods. For example, it was estimated that the automotive industry could face significantly higher manufacturing costs, ultimately impacting the final price of vehicles in the U.S. market. Similarly, the technology and sports equipment sectors would see their profit margins shrink, affecting both manufacturers and distributors. All of this took place in a context where the short-term economy became especially vulnerable to any alteration in the trade flows established over decades. The supply chain's response was swift. The logistics corridors, which crossed the border day after day, began adjusting routes and seeking alternatives to minimize the impact of the tariffs. However, such changes could only partially mitigate the inflationary shock that threatened to spread. While projections indicated that the production index in key sectors would decline in the coming months, the climate of uncertainty created a favorable environment for delays in construction projects and cautious moves by large investors. The message was clear. Every imported dollar now carried an additional cost that, ultimately, could be passed on to consumers. This possibility quickly sparked debate in the boardrooms of American corporations as well as in international economic forums. Trade policy officials in both countries were forced to confront, in real time, a situation in which the simple decision to adjust a percentage could destabilize sectors whose economic mechanisms were inextricably interconnected. In summary, Canada's response at this moment of tension was a decisive and calculated measure aimed at restoring the lost balance and sending an unequivocal message on the international trade stage. The increase in the cost of goods and the potential disruption of supply chains underscore the magnitude of the immediate consequences of this strategy. With every figure analyzed and projections studied, it became clear that the escalation of measures could, in the short term, mark the beginning of an economic readjustment that would directly affect both the United States and Canada. The tariff conflict initiated at the northern border has not remained confined to the relations between the United States and Canada. Its effects have transcended borders and now resonate throughout the global economy. The imposition of these tariffs has triggered a domino effect that threatens to disrupt well-established trade flows, altering the delicate balance of multiple industries on a global scale. In the automotive sector, which depends on an interconnected network of supplies and multilateral agreements, manufacturers have been forced to revisit and readjust their production strategies. The uncertainty created by the tariffs has led to delays in deliveries and increased manufacturing costs, potentially translating into higher-priced vehicles for the end consumer. The impact extends internationally, affecting both local production and competitiveness in global markets, as every link in the value chain feels the pressure. The consumer electronics market has not been left unscathed either. Companies that rely on components produced in both nations now face disruptions in their supply chains. Electronic devices, from smartphones to computers, have experienced rising costs, as the uncertainty surrounding tariff agreements compels suppliers to adjust their prices. This inflationary pressure is reflected in the final retail price, thereby reducing the purchasing power of consumers in one of the world's most significant economies. The agricultural sector, fundamental to food security and economic stability, also finds itself in the crosshairs of this escalation. The export of fruits, vegetables, and other essential products to international markets has been threatened by the imposition of tariffs that raise the cost of each shipment. Farmers who for years have supported both domestic and export markets now face the prospect of disrupted supply chains and the potential for soaring food prices, directly impacting millions of families. The reaction among economic experts has been forceful. International forums and sessions of the World Trade Organization have discussed the risk of an inflationary spiral triggered by the domino effect these tariffs could set off. Recent surveys reflect mounting concern within American society, with a significant portion of the population believing that these protectionist policies will not only drive up the cost of consumer goods, but could also lead to a substantial loss of jobs in vulnerable sectors. The international community watches these events with caution. Analysts warn that what began as a bilateral dispute could quickly transform into a crisis that destabilizes global trade. With each tariff decision, economic interconnections are tested, revealing just how fragile the system can be in a context of uncertainty and abrupt changes. In summary, the shockwaves generated by these tariff adjustments demonstrate that the trade conflict between Canada and the United States has become much more than a local dispute. It serves as a wake-up call for the international economic order. The disruption of trade flows and the rising cost of essential goods are just some of the indicators of a chain reaction which, if not managed through dialogue and cooperation, could bring about prolonged and profound consequences for the global economic landscape.